A federal immigration officer shoots and kills a motorist in Minneapolis. DHS said it was to suppress an act of domestic terrorism. Witnesses and city officials called it a reckless and senseless act of violence. The U.S. seizes 2 additional Venezuelan tankers and asserts control over that country's oil reserves. We have brand new polling on reaction to U.S. actions in Venezuela. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on new nutritional guidelines, vaccine recommendations, and the withholding of federal health care funds in some blue states. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. There is, at this hour, a standoff in Minneapolis. It is physical and it is rhetorical. It is quite obviously tense, and it may well prove to be unpredictable. The underlying cause is a woman driving a vehicle was shot and killed by a federal immigration agent. Descriptions of what happened vary dramatically. DHS says the vehicle attempted to ram ICE officers in a residential neighborhood.
We're continuing to gather more information, but this goes to show the assaults that our ICE officers and our law enforcement are under every single day. These vehicle rammings are domestic acts of terrorism. We're working with the Department of Justice to prosecute them as such.
Videos from the scene suggest something very different. Furious local and state officials said the shooting victim did not pose a threat and under no circumstance deserved to die. The mayor of Minneapolis called on ICE, deployed in numbers 15 times larger than its standard law enforcement posture in Minneapolis, to leave the city.
They are already trying to spin this as an action of self-defense. Having seen the video of myself, I want to tell everybody directly, that is this was an agent recklessly using power that resulted in somebody dying. To ICE, get the out of Minneapolis. We do not want you here. Your stated reason for being in this city is to create some kind of safety, and you are doing exactly the opposite.
We will have reports from the scene and speak to a member of the Minneapolis City Council. But first, we want to show you, without commentary, the events from earlier today of the shooting of that motorist. Nicole Skanga joins us now from Minneapolis. Nicole, it's been a very turbulent day in Minneapolis. Set the scene for us and what we know.
Well, Major, I'm currently standing where ICE immigration operations began earlier today. That operation became a crime scene. That crime scene became a demonstration zone as we watched as ICE agents deployed tear gas on protesters, and FBI descended on the scene, as well as local and state law enforcement. That protest became a vigil, and right now behind me, folks are lighting candles, are laying flowers, and are saying prayers, singing for a 37-year-old woman who was shot dead. We know that the immigration and enforcement removal presence here in Minneapolis has grown over the past few days, beginning on Sunday. That's actually why we're here in Minneapolis, Major. We interviewed the DHS secretary just yesterday on what is the single largest deployment of federal agents to an American city under the Trump administration. There are more than 2,000 federal agents on the ground, including 1,500 ICE or immigration agents, and that is 15 times the number of immigration agents that would typically be assigned to the Minneapolis area. Major, I don't want our viewers to forget just how raw this community is. And we have heard it from witnesses, and we have heard it from neighbors who are heartbroken, who have told us, quote, "Is this what America looks like?" That where I'm standing today, that immigration operation turned crime scene, turned demonstration, turned vigil, is less than 1 mile away from where George Floyd was killed at the hands of police.
Picking up on that point, Nicole, it's been relayed to me that there has been for quite some time, long before this ICE deployment, nervousness in the community writ large in Minneapolis about police presence, police activity. And as we saw in the video, the approaching vehicle unmarked, which may have contributed to confusion, anxiety about what was about to transpire or what this was about. Is that something you're also hearing?
Absolutely, Major. It is a sense of fear that is deeply rooted here in Minneapolis as the widening fraud probe turned into a federal law enforcement deployment that many within Minneapolis felt was targeting the Somali American community. And we asked DHS Secretary Noem about that. She relayed to us that immigration enforcement operations here weren't particularly directed at any community, that they were going after, quote, the worst of the worst criminal offenders. We did go on an ICE raid alongside the DHS secretary in the pre-dawn hours yesterday, and we witnessed there a very extensive law enforcement operation with all unmarked vehicles, aside from one Bearcat in which the DHS secretary was inside. So we have seen a rising tension, even as we were on that law enforcement operation, protesters in the streets drawing whistles, screaming, throwing things towards agents. We've heard the DHS secretary express worries about the safety of her community, but we've also heard community leaders and state leaders, including Governor Walz, push back on that, saying that he has warned that something like this would happen for weeks, if not months. We've seen similar scenes play out across the country, including in Chicago, where just a few months ago, there was a vehicle ramming incident between a bystander and ICE immigration enforcement that resulted in an agent opening fire. We saw that same thing play out today. The difference, Major, being that someone is killed today. Someone is dead. Major.
Nicole Sganga, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Jason Chavez is a Minneapolis City Council member, and he represents the city's 9th Ward, the area where today's shooting took place. Council member, what do you know about the victim? What do you know about the circumstances? And what do you believe the repercussions should be?
Well, first and foremost, I want to give my condolences to Renee Nicole Good and her family, the individual that was in our community that was murdered by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The behavior of these ICE agents in our neighborhood is creating an unwelcoming, unsafe, and disgusting behavior that is only tearing our families apart. And as you saw today with these videos, has taken the life of a community member here in Minneapolis. What needs to happen right now is we need justice. We need this ICE officer arrested and fired immediately from ICE. And we also need to make sure that our community members continue to patrol our neighborhoods here in Minneapolis and across the state to make sure that ICE isn't kidnapping more of our neighbors.
Threshold question for you, Mr. Chavez. Do you believe ICE has any legitimate authority in Minneapolis ever?
The work of tearing our families apart, the work of separating families in the city and in the state, the work of picking up mothers at bus stops, folks running food trucks, folks driving to work is inhumane behavior and has no place in the city.
Even if it is in furtherance of enforcing existing federal immigration law?
The work that they do is tear families apart, and that is not work that, as a city elected official, I will ever support.
Did you fear this would happen when ICE dramatically enlarged its footprint in Minneapolis?
Yeah, they have a whole bunch of folks as ICE agents that don't know how to do their jobs, that are untrained and unqualified. And the behavior that we saw today and we're seeing across our state is a bunch of rookies that don't know how to even do their jobs and are creating terror in our community. So this is not surprising at all.
You said murder. Why do you use that word?
This was murder by ICE officials. They did not need to shoot somebody that was leaving the scene.
How do you interpret what the video shows?
It shows ICE being untrained, unmanageable, and not being able to de-escalate a situation. They need to be held accountable, arrested, and fired.
And what recourse does the city of Minneapolis have if that doesn't happen? And who do you believe the arresting authority can be or should be?
My hope is that the state takes charge of this and makes sure that these individuals are fired, or that these individuals are held accountable by the law.
Member of the Minneapolis City Council, Ward 9, Jason Chavez, I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anna Schechter joins us now. She's the head of CBS News' Crime and Public Safety Unit. Anna, you've been following this all day. Your impressions of what is visible, what the investigation will do going forward, and do you suspect that there could be a clashing of federal and state equities here because there are very sharp divisions about who's responsible and what actually went down?
That's an excellent question, Major, because already we've seen a clash of narratives. You have the mayor and the governor of the state of Minnesota telling a story about a murder that occurred, and we just heard from a city council member as well. And then you have something completely different. Almost immediately after the shooting, you had Kristi Noem and Donald Trump posting to Truth Social, and Noem posting to X a statement describing what happened as domestic terrorism and saying that the victim of the shooting was running over the agent. Now, I've seen 3 angles so far. What I want to know is what happened before this occurred, in the minutes and maybe even a half an hour before this, because I want to know why those agents were pulling on the door, asking her to stop and get out of the vehicle. They were directing her to get out of the vehicle. It looks like she was turning to try to leave. But why were they doing that? Were they frustrated by her protesting? Were they angry at her? Did something else happen? We just don't know. But certainly from at least 2 of those angles, it does appear that she was trying to drive away. And there was that officer who drew his weapon and fired that shot. What was going on in his mind? Because central to what happens as this plays out is, did he act with a reasonable use of force given his perceived threat? There's a judgment call, and the guidelines for how federal agents respond place that judgment call at the heart of how they are supposed to act. So investigators are likely interviewing him, asking him how he experienced it, what was going through his mind, what led up to this. So all of that's going to go into an investigation, and I hope that that will eventually get released to the public.
Very quickly, Anna, is there a possibility of any body cam video in this matter?
That's a great question. Had they been Minneapolis Police Department officials, then yes. But these were ICE agents. They are not required to wear body cam video. And of course, that would be helpful in adding to this picture that investigators are putting together.
Anna Schechter, as always, thank you very much. The U.S. has seized 2 sanctioned oil tankers linked to Venezuela, keyword linked. Officials say the tankers were in violation of U.S. sanctions and embargo on Venezuela. You're seeing video of the ship seized in the Caribbean right now, right there on your screen. Officials say the other ship was captured in the North Atlantic and was flying, the U.S. contends, illegitimately a Russian flag. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said today's actions are part of a 3-phase plan for Venezuela.
We are in the midst right now and, in fact, about to execute on a deal to take all the oil. They have oil that is stuck in Venezuela. They can't move it because of our quarantine and because it's sanctioned. We are going to take between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil. We're going to sell it in the marketplace at market rates.
CBS News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent and moderator of Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, joins me now. Margaret, help us understand what's gone on today. It's a big task. I lay it right at your...
Make sense of it.
Yes.
Well, what you heard the Secretary of State try to describe as this fully baked 3-phase plan is a plan that's coming together here. But what they aim to do is to use the proceeds from these sales to carry out the plan they say is coming to rebuild the country. Now, that's not yet where we are. Those seizures and what he calls an oil quarantine are meant to cut off the existing regime. Because remember, the existing regime is still in control.
Right.
In fact, the person who controls the security forces is still in office, who is incredibly repressive, wanted by U.S. law enforcement and under sanction. And then the person who controls the military is also still in power. So what the U.S. is doing is really first trying to cut off their financial lifeline, which is then going to, as Secretary Rubio said, they're going to take the oil and sell it. But this is really very much in transition. If the United States was really in control of Venezuela right now, why are there Americans still sitting in detention facilities there?
Right.
If America's actually in control right now, why is the main conduit to the cartels and the main conduit to the Russians and other adversaries still in power? So they are really trying to get control by doing these seizures.
You mentioned Russia. They had some commentary about what happened today because they very recently registered and recognized one of these vessels as a Russian-flagged vessel. The United States considers that an illegitimate act. What does this suggest, and what should we be watching for?
Well, as I heard you say rightly there, J.D. Vance, the vice president, said it wasn't a real declaration by Russia. I'm not sure exactly what he's disputing there, because the Russian government did say that they
they put out a statement to the effect of that today.
Exactly, they did. But it does set up for more of a complicated power play here than you would necessarily take away from some of the remarks in the Trump administration to date. Russia is deeply, deeply involved in Venezuela, invested, in fact. And we've heard very little from the Trump administration about how they plan to expel them. You've heard them talk more about Iran and China. We haven't heard the new Venezuelan government actually say they're going to do any of that. The new Venezuelan government is the same old Venezuelan government that was completely dependent on them. So that is where we're kind of stuck. What I think stands out to me from what Marco Rubio laid out, the Secretary of State, today in this 3-phase plan, is that it is not a 6-month plan. It is not a 6-week plan. That is, at minimum, a year and a half to 2 years before you can actually go ahead and get a transition to a new government happening. He threw out there as point 2 this idea of recovering and rebuilding Venezuela, calling for all the political prisoners to be released and for the opposition to come back home. I guess we're supposed to take from that they will be part of a new transition to a new government. Who guarantees that when those exiles go home, they're not slaughtered by the security chief who's still in power?
And Margaret, very quickly, where does this leave the opposition, Maria Corina Machado?
That's who's wondering, can I go home? Will you guarantee my safety if I go home?
And have I been left out in the cold by the rhetoric of the Trump administration?
Who has not said the word democracy to date in terms of that transition. I pressed the Secretary of State about that repeatedly on Sunday. A transition to what? And this democratic election, who will it include? Because if the opposition is to return and to build and campaign, they need to, first of all, feel they can safely do that. And who guarantees that? Is it Donald Trump saying, listen, Minister of the Interior, if you lay a hand on this person, I will have a problem with you? And how do they win the support of the business community, which, by the way, is such a huge factor here in everything that is happening in terms of ensuring access to oil resources now and in the future? That is the other entity we're not talking about enough.
And they seemingly, at least initially, appear to be betting on the remnants of the existing regime staying in power and negotiating with the Trump administration, not the opposition.
The predictable, right. And the thing hanging over the head is not just the oil seizures, but also the threat of military force to go do another snatch and grab of the Interior Minister, Cabello.
Margaret Brennan, brilliant as always. Thank you so much.
Good to talk to you.
New CBS News polling shows Americans are split on the Trump administration removing Nicolas Maduro from power. And people's views appear tied to what goals they perceive the U.S. as pursuing. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, your friend and mine, always, Anthony Salvanto joins us now. Anthony, what do we know?
Hey there, Major. Look, here's that split you talked about, as with so many things in America today, right? Marginally divided country. Here's what we mean by goals. First, do they think the administration has clearly explained what the U.S.'s goals are? You get this big number, 70%, who say no, they don't think the administration has done that. So into that space, a lot of people can then project or think about what they imagine or what they think the administration's goals are the top one that they give is getting access to Venezuela's oil. The thing is, the way this drives views on it is that when they say that, they're less likely to approve of the action, whereas, especially a lot of Republicans say top goals are stopping drugs from entering the U.S., stopping gangs and terrorists from entering the U.S. So let me show you how that breaks down. If you think this is a lot about access to oil, over 2/3 disapprove. If you think it's a lot about stopping drugs, big numbers of approval. What you think it's about defines what you think of it overall, Major.
And what do we know, Anthony, about we use this term colloquially, MAGA base for President Trump?
Well, start with Republicans, and you see these big numbers of approval, right? 89%. Now, one of the things when you dive in a little bit closer and you see MAGA Republicans here, you get this overwhelming amount of approval. Now, we know in political circles there's discussion about whether MAGA might be, hypothetically, more reluctant to say, well, it's foreign intervention, overseas things. But one thing that really stands out is they think that it makes the U.S. stronger. Look at these Republican numbers. 8 and 10 think that doing this makes the U.S. position in the world stronger, and they see the operation as a success. That's a big part of the reason that they support it so overwhelmingly right now, man.
Brand new data from Anthony Salvanto. Very glad to have it. Thank you, sir, very much. Coming up on The Takeout, former Army General and CIA Director David Petraeus joins me to discuss the Trump administration's interest in acquiring Greenland. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on flipping the food pyramid. Our Nancy Cordes speaks with the Health and Human Services Secretary about those changes, as well as changes to vaccine policy. And from top-selling mystery author to true crime, Harlan Coben. Man, is he famous. Joins CBS to unravel murder cases and expose hidden truths. He joins me later this hour. The Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to The Takeout. The White House says it is remaining open to what it considers numerous options to acquire Greenland. Here was Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt earlier today when asked about a potential, maybe cash offer.
Well, that's something that's currently being actively discussed by the president and his national security team. And I would point out that the acquisition of Greenland by the United States is not a new idea. This is something that presidents dating back to the 1800s have said is advantageous for America's national security.
Retired Army General and former CIA Director David Petraeus joins me now. He also served as head of Central Command. David, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. The press secretary is correct. It's not a new idea. It's not a new idea, Greenland, and its potential security meaning to the United States. But this is a new set of methods in discussing how it might be acquired.
Well, look, President Trump has used a variety of different methods over the years, often different than his predecessors. And in fact, he's often gotten results with those methods, such as getting Europeans to finally spend much more on defense than they had been as a percentage of GDP. He's in a moment where there's real leverage coming out of this extraordinary demonstration of American military capability, this operation to bring Maduro and his wife to justice, not even losing a soldier or an aircraft, despite what are now, we're learning, some very considerable gunfights, including over 30 Cuban Secret Service members around Maduro alone. So there's a moment he uses all of his leverage. Let's go back to his own words, Art of the Deal, where he says you should use every tool that you have, flex your muscles before you sit down. In fact, before you sit at the table, punch the other guy in the nose. So these are unconventional means. It's using the leverage that we have. One will hope that obviously there's listening to those on the Hill, such as Senator McConnell and others, talking about the vital importance of NATO. Obviously, Denmark controls the Greenland territory. NATO member, we have a base in Greenland. If we want more facilities or infrastructure, I'm sure that Denmark would be happy to negotiate that with us. If it's that we need more of the strategic minerals and rare earths, again, I'm sure that they're open for discussion on that. And we have a lot more influence right now, a lot more leverage, I think, to get what it is that we presumably want. Although I think some of the notions thrown out there are more for the leverage effect than they are for real strategy going forward.
Would you put the threat of military occupation or landing in Greenland in that category?
I put that likelihood pretty low.
I like to diffuse the conversation that it's not a nutty idea that there are very contemporary, meaning here and now, security interests in Greenland. And as climate change changes the navigability around the
Very
Arctic,
much so. Yep.
these are legitimate issues. But how would you rank
These are
them,
very
David?
legitimate issues.
How would you rank them? How do we think about, how should we think about the idea that there are some number of Russian vessels, some number of Chinese vessels in and around Greenland? Is that near the top? Is it 10th, 20th? How should we think about that?
No, it is a big concern. And at a time when, as you note, because of climate change, the polar ice cap is melting. On Greenland itself, the ice is melting, and it's exposing more strategic minerals and rare earths. So with each passing year, it becomes of greater geostrategic importance. And again, I'm sure that Denmark is open to discussing together with the leadership in Greenland what it is that we are seeking to achieve and how that might be done.
David Petraeus, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Good to be with you, Major. Thank you.
Big changes to childhood vaccine recommendations. HHS Secretary RFK Jr. goes one-on-one with our Nancy Cordes. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thanks for hanging out with us. The White House has taken several actions this week to reshape administration policy regarding public health. Today, it rolled out new dietary guidelines recommending, among other things, against highly processed foods. And on Monday, it updated recommendations for childhood vaccines, advising for fewer shots. This move about vaccines facing pushback from some in the public health space. Our Nancy Cordes spoke with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and joins me now. Nancy, I remember, as you do, during the confirmation hearing, senators asked Robert F. Kennedy Jr. what his intentions were on vaccines. And if I remember the quote correctly, he said, "I'm not going to take them away from anyone."
Right.
How should we view that in the context of these new recommendations?
He said he would follow the science, and in some cases, senators' votes for him were contingent upon those promises. But now the CDC is actually doing a pretty notable rollback in the recommendations for the vaccine schedule for young children. For example, flu, rotavirus, hepatitis. They are now no longer saying all children should get those vaccines. They're saying some children, children who are at highest risk, should get them. Other kids can still get them, but only after consultation with their doctor. And so I asked the secretary today, why these changes? What is the scientific basis for it? Take a listen. What is the scientific basis for rolling back recommendations for vaccines that have been proven safe and effective for 50 years?
Again, the science is in the report. What we did is we looked at the scientific evidence, and we looked at the practices, the best practices of our peer nations, of the European nations. And what we centered on was the vaccines that are used by everybody, where everybody
Isn't every
agrees.
nation different, though? We're the most advanced nation in the world when it comes to science and medicine.
We also have the sickest population. The countries that have fewer vaccines actually have much healthier populations than us.
Is that because people use vaccines? Where's the evidence for that?
Not necessarily. But the vaccines are not sparing them those diseases. So, and all of those countries believe that if you put too many vaccines on the schedule, and vaccines that are unnecessary to stop common diseases that actually threaten children's health, that it is going to decrease uptake. It decreases the faith of the public in the vaccine schedule. First of all, people should know we're not taking vaccines away from anybody. If you want to get the vaccine, you can get it. It's going to be fully covered by insurance, just like it was before.
But it is more difficult now for parents to get their children immunized for the flu, right? They can't just go to a pharmacy. They'll have to consult with their doctor first.
You have to, you need to do a shared decision-making with your physician, which is how it ought to be.
Fewer people will get the flu vaccine.
Well, that may be, and maybe that's a better thing.
Based on what evidence? There are 290 kids who died last year due to the flu. there's no evidence that any kids died or were harmed due to the flu vaccine. So isn't this inevitably going to lead to more children dying?
The Cochrane collaboration, which is kind of one of the ultimate arbiters of vaccine safety and clinical data, has done an extensive meta-review of the flu vaccine. And they found that there is no evidence that the flu vaccine prevents serious disease or that it prevents hospitalizations or death in children.
So, Nancy, you also asked the HHS secretary about the new nutrition guidelines and this recent clawback of healthcare funds to some blue states.
I did. And obviously, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. first rose to prominence, not only on the basis of a lot of his vaccine skepticism, which caught on with a certain portion of the electorate, but also because of his views on dietary guidelines and what he thinks Americans should eat more and what they shouldn't eat. So he came out with a new food pyramid today. You know, we remember the food pyramid from when we grew up, and it's kind of inverted now. Basically, he's saying processed foods, packaged foods, those have to go. Those are not healthy for you. Way at the bottom. Up at the top, higher than it was before, fats, full-fat milk, full-fat cheese, saturated fats and protein, red meat, that kind of thing, which is kind of controversial because the American Heart Association said today there is a link between eating saturated fat and high cholesterol, cardiovascular disease. In my interview with the health secretary, he disputed those findings. He said it's old science.
Nancy Cordes, always a pleasure. Thank you so very much.
Got it.
We are more than, hold on, folks, 2 weeks past that deadline. So why have we seen less than 1% of the Department of Justice's files related to Jeffrey Epstein? Our reporter panel tracking that and a lot of other news on this very busy news day. They'll be with me next right here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Reporter panel time. We are joined by Nicholas Wu and Daniela Diaz. Nicholas, congressional reporter for Politico. Daniela, politics reporter for Notice. Remember, that's news of the U.S. We promoted this going to break. The Epstein files, the Justice Department, about 1% of what's there has been released. That's not in accordance with the law.
Absolutely not. We thought we were going to get the files during that deadline that was set by the House. How many times have I talked about this with you, Major? Everyone was expecting it, Republicans and Democrats, because if you remember, let's flash back to right before the holiday season, it was almost a unanimous vote in both chambers. I mean, this is a bipartisan issue, and so far they've released less than 10% of the actual files. DOJ is saying that while they're trying to remove all of the victims' names, any information that could reveal any identities, that's what they're saying is taking a while.
And Nicholas, this does not strike many lawmakers, even Republicans, as living up to the spirit or letter of the law.
Not at all. Remember that this, the Epstein discharge petition and the legislation that came out of that passed through the House and Senate, on a very bipartisan basis. And so, there's a lot of political pressure for DOJ to move on this, but there are the practical realities of releasing everything.
And tomorrow, there will be 2 votes in the House to override President Trump's first vetoes of his second term. What's going to happen?
So what we're expecting is to see a bipartisan majority in the House override vetoes. Remember, hitting that 2/3 threshold to basically undo the president's veto of what were 2 relatively uncontroversial pieces of legislation. One for water projects in Colorado and the other to assist a tribe in Florida. And these were things that members of Congress were trying to do for their constituents back home. And it appears in some ways that Trump vetoed these for political reasons that were unrelated to the legislation.
And Daniela, there is also going to be a vote tomorrow on the discharge petition that is now ripened to extend existing but now recently expired Obamacare tax credits.
Right. The procedural vote was today. It might be happening right now, is expected to pass. We expect that vote tomorrow to pass. And what it's important to remember when you cover Congress is this is a procedural tool by the minority party, Democrats who don't have the majority, using this tool to force a vote and joined by Republicans who felt powerless in this situation with their leadership, with President Donald Trump, with Speaker Mike Johnson. These battleground district Republicans saying we need to help our constituents on extending these tax credits because premiums are going up on health care. And that's why we're working with the opposite party to do this. Now, we expect it to pass. How this lands in the Senate remains to be seen, but they're going to have a lot of pressure.
To that point, Nicholas, the Senate is going to be under pressure now because it's going to have these veto overrides it's going to have to deal with. It may set them aside, but it's going to have to do that in full public view, and it's going to have to deal with the Obamacare tax credits.
Right. There's a lot of pressure on senators to do something, whether it's, taking what the House has passed.
1 year, 2 years,
Right,
3
exactly.
years. Is
What
it
are you-
reformed? Is the schedule of availability based on income altered in some way? Is there some fraud protection? Something.
Right. But the question is, on a more practical basis, now that open enrollment is already happening, whether that deadline has to be moved, whether this will have to be retroactive in some way, there's a lot of questions there, especially as people have already bought their health insurance through
And are feeling the pressure of the price increases there. Very quickly, Daniela, also, there's going to be a war powers resolution consideration in the Senate on not just Venezuela, but possibly also Greenland.
Exactly. And this legislation, this measure would actually force the administration to have less power when it comes to moving forward on how they handle Venezuela. But this comes at amidst a lot of briefings that we've been seeing in Congress with national or security officials and lawmakers, where lawmakers are asking, what's next? Right. They don't have any answers to these questions that we're hearing from when we talk to Republicans and Democrats on what they're hearing. And it's going to continue to be an issue on how they're going to handle these issues.
And the White House saying, we have the power, trust us. And Congress saying, maybe not so fast. We'll see how that plays out. Nicholas Wu, Daniela Diaz, as always, it's a great pleasure to have you. Exposing shocking murders and scandals, the world's best-selling mystery author Harlan Coben joins me next for a preview of his new CBS true crime show. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. Harlan Coben is known, admired, and in some cases beloved for the shocking twists and turns in his best-selling mystery novels and his Netflix series. Now, Coben is turning his attention to the world of true crime. And here's a preview of Harlan Coben's final twist, which premieres tonight on a most excellent network known as CBS.
He's the greatest thriller writer.
Coben's written over 30 New York Times bestsellers.
With over a dozen hit TV shows and movies.
In all our stories, the same question: what made the killer cross that line?
Here is some of my conversation with Coben, which occurred earlier today. Cliches are shop-worn, but also true, Harlan. The cliche is, fact is stranger than fiction. For you, in this particular endeavor, it's very meaningful.
Yeah, it's a strange, but it's obviously true. Fact is stranger than fiction. In these stories that we're doing on Final Twist, if I had written them in a novel, and you had read that novel, Major, you'd be throwing the book in my head saying, this is so unrealistic. There's no way this can possibly be. These twists and turns make no sense. Fiction has to follow certain rules, but reality doesn't. So these stories are actually crazier in many ways. And they're twists and turns that I, who normally can spot them a million miles away, never see coming because it's real.
Because human beings are more varied, more interesting, more complex, and also more banal and more predictable than something you might invent.
I think that's right. I mean, I think it's part of the human condition. We also put ourselves in the boat. So I'll always get, not nasty necessarily emails, but I have a show right now on Netflix called Runaway, for example. And I'll get, oh, wait, this couldn't happen, that couldn't happen. But believe me, nothing that I've ever written in any novel is as strange as the stories that we're telling on this TV show. And these are all real. You have that gravitas when it's reality, where you can't say, oh, that couldn't happen. It did happen.
And you mentioned the word show. Is there a showy part to this telling, or is this a victim-based, try to elevate their voice, their agency, their story element?
I mean, I think it's both. I think it's more the latter. I think if you're telling the best story that you can, this is true crime. And so there are real victims. But if I'm telling the best story I can, it has to not only stir your mind and stir your pulse, make you lean forward because you want to know that next twist, but it has to stir your heart. And it was really important to me that, with Final Twist, my name's on it. Harlan Coben's Final Twist, that we give voice and agency to the victims and the families. I think it's an important part of it. But strangely enough, it also strengthens the story, because if you care about the people, you're going to care about the story that much more. So one doesn't have to preclude the other.
When I started my career, Harlan, I was a police reporter in Amarillo, Texas, then Las Vegas, Nevada, and briefly in Houston, Texas. And one of the more challenging parts of that job was to deal face-to-face with victims very soon after something tragic happened to them, either accidentally or as a result of a crime. And that human connection in that moment is something you never forget. In these cases, you're a bit removed from that, but I'm sure some of that visceral emotion comes to you.
Well, it does. The first episode is called Billy and Billy. It's about a young couple. His name is Billy. Her name is Billie Jean. And they're found murdered in their home, and their baby's there, alive, thank goodness. But the baby is left there at home in Tennessee. And then when you start getting into the details, is it a CIA agent? Is it a social media post? What is it? And that's a different question. But if you don't feel for these people, this story is not one that I would want to tell. And it's deeply moving. It's deeply affecting. And I hope, it was really important to me that we give these people a voice and that you get to know, by the end of this show, I think you will know Billy, and you'll know Billie Jean, and you'll know their family and friends. You'll know the police officers involved. We try not to have too much narration. I step in and will help lead it along a little bit, but we don't have a narrator's voice. We wanted the people involved to tell the story for this show.
And in this endeavor, are you a clinician of crime? Are you a clinician of the justice system? Are you a clinician of law enforcement techniques? What are you trying to achieve?
I think it's all the above. I think one of the things that I don't think I'm guilty of it, frankly, as a fiction writer, but a lot are, is we've made police work seem really sort of simple. And, they go into a crime scene now and they find a hair and they capture the killer. And that's not what happens. And so you're really able to see the human mistakes, the frailty of our system, both in terms of law enforcement, in terms of legalese, in terms of the justice system, as well as, what the families kind of go through. Some of these stories, we have a number of different episodes, but some of them, it took over 20 years to solve the crime. That's not that uncommon. We, again, think today it's very, very easy. How come the cops don't just do this and they can't just check the Ring camera, blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of complexity to it. And I hope we're also showing that. There's a lot of things I kind of want out of this show. I mean, it's called Final Twist because the shows do have a final twist. When you find out what happened to Billy and Billy, your jaw's going to drop. It's just ridiculous, incredible. But these are also real people. And you have to reflect that as well. So it's a balancing act that I hope we're accomplishing.
Let's say the name one more time. Harlan Coben's Final Twist premieres tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern on CBS, and will be available to stream on Paramount+. You can also see my full 30-minute conversation with Harlan Coben on our YouTube channel. Now, I have a baseball update for you. I know, there's no baseball season now. It's all football, except for people like me, who have dreamed for years of going to fantasy baseball camp. Not just any fantasy baseball camp, San Diego Padres fantasy camp. I will be gone for a week, playing baseball in the Arizona sun. I have put this off for 3 years. News always interfered, and it does again now. But I'm going nevertheless. Something in my soul needs to go and play some baseball. And in case you're curious, I'm not getting any younger, so I need to get about this business. I will send video updates from camp whether you want them or not. I will be back here January 16th. Until then, happy Wednesday. This is The Takeout, relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. The Daily Report, coming up next.